few months ago, I got to drive a Leyland Princess for the first time, and two things happened that were entirely unexpected and made me very happy. The first was that I discovered its secret weapon that makes it one of the most fun drives I've had all year.
Oh yeah.
And the second is that halfway through my day with the Princess, and we had its Triumph TR7 stablemate along as well, by sheer coincidence we bumped into the man who designed both cars. I know, right? What are the chances? Here's the story. I've been curious to try a Princess for a long time. No, not like that. So when a friend offered me the chance to drive this one, I was very keen. Our excuse came when there was a BL Day being held in September of this year at Milton Keynes, which is a pleasant cross-country drive away from where the Princess lives. This particular car is a 2200 HL, which means it's got medium posh trim and the 2.2 litre straight six E-Series engine. It looks fantastic in this coppery metallic colour, which is called Reynard, and for my money is one of the two best colours you can get a Princess in, the other one being jade green. Somewhere along the line, a previous owner of this car, which is an HL, got a bad case of HLS envy and screwed a load of lacquered veneer panels all over the dashboard and the door cards. Even the very short-lived Wolseley version didn't get this level of wood applied to it, and it sounds a bit horrid, but actually, while I'd stop short of recommending that everybody do this, it doesn't look too bad. It kind of gets away with it, and it's been quite neatly done, even down to this makeshift glove box where there ought to just be an open shelf. It certainly doesn't detract from the overall experience, and the overall experience is one of, gosh, what a lot of space. The transverse engine means that the bulkhead is well forward, so there's bags of legroom front and rear. Front wheel drive means the floor is nice and flat too, so the middle passenger on the back seat isn't viewing the world from between her knees, at least not if you fold up this rather nice armrest. The window line curves elegantly downwards before it rises with the wedge-shaped profile, which adds to the feeling of airiness along with the slim pillars. Less useful for rollover protection, but it was a different age. Mounting the engine sideways means that the bonnet line can be shorter, and so it allows for a really shallow rake to the windscreen. Look at it next to this Volvo 240, for example. The Princess's screen is set at a much shallower angle. The boot is very capacious too, although the opening is a little bit letterbox-like for bigger, boxy, bulky items. Which begs a question. With that sloping back, why on earth didn't Harris Mann design it as a hatchback? Well, the answer, of course, is that he did, and here's how I know. Arriving at the BL Day, we parked the Princess up alongside her royal sisters, a 1975, so very early, Wolseley badged version, and a 1976, more basic Princess 1800. We were just standing there admiring the styling when a gentleman who was standing next to us asked if we meant him. And of course we did, for it was none other than Harris Mann himself, by the most wonderful of coincidences. Now, although he was generous with his time and we had a really good conversation, I didn't actually record an interview with him. It just wouldn't have been the right thing to do. He hadn't come to do that, we hadn't arranged anything, I didn't have microphones set up, and there were much more official BL Day people patiently waiting to talk to him, even though he was generous with his time and we had a really good chat. But I did ask him about the hatchback thing, and what he said was that of course he did design it with a hatchback, but the BL management types felt that there was already one of those in the range with the Maxi, and one of these newfangled tailgate things was quite enough. As for Harris Mann's own taste in classic cars, he confessed to me that while he doesn't run a classic at the moment, he does have a bit of a thing for old Citroens, and used to run a GS. So there you go, I didn't know that. Series 1 Princesses like this one run either the 1.8 litre B-Series engine from the MGB and Marina and stuff, or this 2.2 litre E-Series 6. Both were carried over from the ADO 17 Land Crab series that the Princess replaced in 1975. The 6 soldiered on in the Princess 2 from 1978 as well, when the 4-cylinder cars got replaced by the 1.7 litre or 2 litre versions of the O-Series engine instead of the B. It's fed by two SU carburetors and sits sideways here in the engine bay, with epic amounts of space around it so you can get at stuff. The impression of space is further added to by the fact that there are no strut towers on the front wheel arches, but more on the Voodoo suspension later. Actually, this 2200 engine was originally developed by Leyland Australia for its Kimberley and Tasman cars. It's basically 1.5 of the 1.5 litre E-Series engines used in the Maxi, though BMC Australia pulled it out of their Morris 1500 and Nomad cars. I get quite a lot of viewers from Australia, well, proportionally at least. I don't get a lot of viewers from anywhere. So hi if that's you, thank you for watching, and thank you also for having a car culture that habitually added extra cylinders onto some quite lacklustre 4-cylinder BMC engines. Nice work. Power output is 110 bhp at 5,250 rpm. 50 bhp per litre is quite modest really, if I'm honest, but the long stroke means that it's actually more focused on torque, which is a more respectable 125 pound-foot at 3,400 rpm, which is a little bit higher than what you'd call lazy, but still pretty usable. It pulls away really nicely and you don't need to go down to first really for decent acceleration off the line. Second will do it in most situations. I don't know what revs we were doing, because one thing you don't get in a Princess is a rev counter. We've got a very big clock here where a rev counter would naturally go, but certainly on this HL you get a clock rather than the rev counter. Not sure if the HLS is the same. I think it is. I don't think Princesses and rev counters were ever found in the same space. It does beg a question though. What if the 2.2 litre engine had been based on the 1750 4-cylinder E-Series instead of the 1500? Then it would have been a 2.6 and had much stronger performance. In fact, those heroes at Leyland Australia did build such an engine and put it in their P76 and even a Morris Marina of all things for the local Australian market. It generated about 10% more power but a thumping 165 pound-foot of torque, although they did put that through the back wheels rather than the front in both of those cars. So perhaps there would have been epic amounts of steering wheel fight, which is certainly absent on the 2.2 litre Princess. But I also wonder whether having a 2.6 litre engine would have taken it too far into the territory of the SD1. I asked Harris Mann about this too. He downplayed it though. Rover was a separate division at the time. If there were such discussions about the clash between the SD1 and the Princess, then he wasn't party to them. Besides its roominess and avant-garde styling, the Princess had another pearl to her string, and that's its hydrogas suspension. The way this works is that instead of springs, there's a pressurised sphere of nitrogen gas mounted at each wheel, and they're connected fore and aft, but not side to side, so that when the front wheels hit a bump or go down a pothole, there's a corresponding increase or decrease in pressure in the rear sphere, so it evens out the suspension load and smooths the ride. And it works really well. The suspension, I think, I'm really impressed by. It's very smooth. This isn't the best road surface, but it feels like it is. It corners beautifully flat. A fantastic balance between ride comfort and road holding. It's a little bit like Citroen's famous hydropneumatic system, but it's a lot simpler because there isn't a hydraulic pump that's continuously maintaining the pressure. The system's pressurised once and just stays there, at least in theory. It just floats over these speed bumps, no problem at all. You could fly over them at full speed, but obviously we won't because speed bumps are there for a reason. But the Princess deals with them with great grace. Of course, when I say it's simple, I speak as someone who doesn't own one of these cars and doesn't have to worry about finding replacement spheres and Schrader valves and pipes and all of the stuff that goes into it. If you come out one morning and find that one side of the car is a little bit lower than the other and your hydrogas has turned into hydrosag. The steering is delightful. It's pretty light and it's a big wheel this, thin-rimmed and a little bit plasticky, which is perhaps a bit of a shame, but the actual feel of the steering is really nice. It's very light, but it's quite precise. which lends itself nicely to a fast-ish A-road like this one. Turns in nicely, no hint of understeer, even though it's front-wheel drive. Just tracks around in a way that almost belies its size, because it's a fair-sized car, this. So far so good, but even I have to admit that there are still a couple of peas under the Princess's mattress. The thing is, while Ford's ruthlessly effective PR team elbowed British Leyland out of the professionals to give the Capri, the Escort RS2000 and the Granada a macho image that's still current even 40 years later, BL's people could only manage to displace a Granada on that rather comfy slippers sitcom Terry and June. This doesn't help. There is also the reputation for reliability and build quality from the somewhat strike-prone Leyland era. There's some validity to this for sure. Although, as ever, the cars that survive today have had so much maintenance, or were just lucky in the first place, that any real lemons out there have long since gone. So you probably shouldn't be letting that cloud your judgment of how desirable it is as a classic 40-odd years later. But image is in the eye of the beholder, and one person's princess may be another person's ugly sister. The Princess's other shortcoming, and this is probably a bit more valid, is the lack of a fifth gear. It does sound a little bit revvy. I've only been going a few miles, but I've already once found myself reaching for a fifth gear that isn't there. It's not a massive issue. The car will cruise comfortably at 70, which is all you're allowed to do in the UK, right? It's happier on an A-road. In fact, I was very happy on an A-road. And that leads me on to the second big surprise of the day. And this came on the way home, when I discovered that the secret to getting the best performance out of the Princess and finding the driver's car that's hidden within is that the pedals are perfectly set up for heel and toe gear changing. And I mean perfectly, it's one of the best cars for this that I've driven. Heel and toe gear changing, of course, means that as you approach a bend on a fast A or B road, you can blip the throttle with the heel of your foot for a smooth downshift, at the same time as you're pressing the brake pedal with the ball of your foot, while your left foot has got the clutch down to change gear. What this means is that you can brake much later and harder, and be on the throttle much quicker to pull out of the bend as you pass the apex, and have a much smoother gear shift, and keep the engine revs in that sweet spot around 3,400 RPM for maximum torque. All of which means that although the car isn't on paper outright fast, you actually need to spend very little time going slowly, which makes for a much more rewarding drive. Because it's not a modern car, I'm talking about it feeling fast and fun rather than outright stupid hooligan speeds. And frankly, I was in a lot more danger of getting arrested for having a cheesy grin with intent than I was for actually speeding or dangerous driving. If you're interested, by the way, this car is potentially for sale. If you think you might want to make an offer, then I'll put a link in the description below. Drop me a message and I can put you in contact with the owner. I'd be pretty tempted myself. I really like it. But the usual reasons of not enough space and too many cars mean it's not for me this time. I've always thought the Princess was a handsome car and a truly distinctive design, and I like it all the more now that I've not only driven one and driven it properly, but also met the man who created it. And if you're a fan of 1970s wedge-shaped car designs, then you really need to watch this next.